Welcome to our lecture about Internet security, weaknesses and targets. Today we want to speak about Internet protocols. The Internet protocols and the weaknesses of these Internet protocols which cause problems in security. In our lecture, we are in the most important chapter, in the chapter Weaknesses and Targets. We have already discussed how to attack accounts and passwords. We have discussed how one can find out information about the operating system, about the TCP/IP protocol stack that's used on victim system, which is an important information for the attacker to prepare attacks. And today we start to speak about weaknesses of the Internet protocols, and there is so much to say that there are 2 lectures about this topic. When we start, then originally the question is why Internet protocols have weaknesses that are relevant for security and give reasons to provide possibilities to attack a network. Originally, Internet and TCP protocol stack were not designed for commercial use. They were not designed as the communication platform of modern society. Originally, the Internet protocols were an experiment of computer scientists that want to check whether it's possible to provide means for communication over the boundary of incompatible networks along. So the idea was, can one provide by means of software the vision that the interconnection of very different networks provide a uniform network. This was the Internet. So in the beginning, the functionality ideas and to test the functionality, this was what was considered main important. There were no much thought about security issues, and this today causes a lot of problems, and in the following lecture we want to discuss these problems. So the use of Internet, particularly for commercial use, and the interaction of intranets, that means the use of Internet technology inside a company, this have made IT security, and especially security of the used communication protocols, a really important issue. So security leaks, security weaknesses in the Internet protocols, and the lack of security mechanisms are big problems. Big problems beside of other problems. For example, beside of the problem with the small address space that's provided by IPv4, the version, the Internet protocol version that's mainly used today. We have discussed this already, so you know the addresses, there are no more free IPv4 addresses available. Other problem that has also a problem with the IP protocols is that hardly any possibility to prioritize real-time data. Meanwhile, that's a complete difference to the former use of the Internet. Internet is used to transport and communicate multimedia data, real-time data, videos, audios. So in the Internet protocols, in the Internet protocol version 4 that's used today, there are almost no possibilities to differentiate between the more static data and the real-time data, and to help to provide mechanisms to prioritize such real-time data. Then there are only few possibilities for encryption and authentication, and the reason is, this is one reason for one argument to change the Internet protocol in use, Internet protocol version 4 into the Internet protocol next generation, in the Internet protocol version 6, because IPv6, the new Internet protocol, provides solutions for some of the security problems that come with IP version 4, but not for all. So of course, if I speak about a lack of possibility for encryption or a lack of means for authentication in the protocol, in the TCP/IP protocol stack on the level of the internet protocol level, then of course you can add additional system. You can run applications that particularly are responsible for encryption. But sometimes it's useful to have this on the protocol level, and we will see when we now start to discuss the internet protocols and their weaknesses under the aspect what kind of weaknesses provide possibilities to attack such networks. We will see that it would be good to have also such functionality on the protocol level. So meanwhile, the manufacturers of routers and firewall systems, they are able to fix several of the security leaks of the TCP/IP protocol, but some of these weaknesses of the TCP/IP implementations still remain. Besides of the inherent security problems of the protocols themselves, there are other serious weaknesses that may be misused by attackers that want to attack a network on the internet protocol level. So for example, configuration errors. Configuration errors on systems, configuration errors for routers, configuration errors for firewalls. So even if these systems provide means to secure a network, if they are not correctly configured, then this mean cannot do their work. There are ideas to increase security of a system by filtering certain activities, certain packets for certain reasons. So if these mechanisms are incompletely introduced, are incomplete installed, then they cannot provide their security abilities. So for example, often a failure we can occur very often is that there is an incomplete filter, port filter configurations. Active ICMP options provide possibilities to attack a system. So when we later in the lecture we will discuss and will introduce some of the attacks that misuse ICMP protocol messages. Another problem is that the routing tables are not carefully created. Also, this can cause security problems. For example, if an attacker manipulates the routing table in such a way so that all the traffic goes along its station. There are many other things that make it, that open doors for attackers to break into a network or to cause some security problems. The security leaks of the TCP/IP protocols often are used to attack the protocols of the application layer. So communication is only a mean so that application can do their work. So the attackers are not so much interested to do something to get some measure or some problems on the protocol level. No, they use attacks on the protocol level to attack application. To attack application on the application layer, like the protocols on the application layer, FTP, file transfer protocol, DNS, domain name service, the emails protocol, SMTP, NNTP, and others. But also they try to attack the applications below of the TCP/IP protocol stack to cause them to steal data or cause some damage. Break-in. This is one of the main goals of an attacker. But beside of this break-in into a computer system to steal data, to make some manipulation, to get insights to certain secret and confidential things. Besides of these break-ins into computer system, many attacks aim to eliminate or respectively to paralyze services that are provided by a system. So this kind of attacks are called denial of service attacks, the DOS attacks. Here, a service that's provided by a website or by a company is infected or paralyzed so that the company has some damage because the service is not provided in the correct way. So beside of break-ins, such denial of service attacks are a main goal for attackers. Now let's start to have an overview, a look on the attack scenarios on the TCP/IP protocol level. So let's start with attack scenarios on the IP layer. There are the attack method of IP spoofing. There is the attack mode, the attacks that are based on the misuse of the ICMP protocols. These are called the ICMP attacks. There are routing attacks, the ARP, address resolution protocol attacks. There are IP fragmentation attacks. So about all these attacks we will speak in the lecture, and we'll learn more about this type of attacks. IP bombing is the last one I want to explain when I show you and introduce you into some attack scenarios on the IP layer. But the TCP/IP protocol stack, there are more layers. So there are also attack scenarios, dangerous attack scenarios known on the TCP layer, on the control protocol layer. So SYN flooding is an attack method on the TCP layer. The TCP sequence number attacks are very serious. The abort of TCP connections, takeover of TCP connections, so called hijacking. These are attacks on TCP, but on the control layer, on the transmission control layer, there is also another transport protocol, that's the UDP protocol. Also, there are security attacks against the UDP protocol. So here in the lecture, I want to introduce the UDP spoofing. So beside of the control levels, we have this another protocol in between the transmission control level and the application level. That's the SSL protocol, or in the standardized versions, the TLS protocol. And here I want to show you and introduce you as an example the man-in-the-middle attack on SSL and TLS. These attacks we will discuss in the next lecture. In this lecture, I want to start to introduce you into attacks against the IP protocol, attacks that are misusing some weaknesses of protocols on the internet layer. But before, I want to mention some more attacks. The attacks against the application, attack against protocol that are located at the application layer. So there are attacks against the domain name service system, attacks against email system, telnet, FTP attacks. So you see these are attacks against the web server. So these are attacks against the protocols on the application layer of the internet. Of course, there are many more, but here in the lecture, we want to give only a few examples of all this. As I already mentioned, now I start with introducing some attack methods against the internet protocol and against protocols on the internet layer of TCP/IP protocol stack. So in the first, what I want to introduce is the so-called IP address spoofing. So the internet address spoofing sometimes is also called shortly IP address spoofing. And this is a very common method, so it's a mostly used technique to overcome firewall systems. This method provides the basis, and that makes it so dangerous, provides the basis for many other attacks. Here's the basic idea of this IP address spoofing. Basic idea is that an attacker produces data packets and sends them out with a falsified sender IP address. So the sender address is a false one. So it's not the right one or the attacker one, it's a false one. In most cases, attacker use for this faked sender address an internal IP address of the networks they want to attack. And the exposure is that what is the goal of this attack is that some firewall system which are only based on packet filtering make wrong decisions. They check the packet and they recognize an internal sender address, and for that reason they treat this packet, although it comes from the external attacker, they treat it like an internal data package and allow also to transfer this to some points, some hosts where it's forbidden for external users to send packets. So the idea is IP spoofing is to manipulate the sender address of a packet to cause wrong decisions on firewalls which are based on packet filtering. So here's an example. So here we have our attacker, and our attacker wants to attack here the victim's network, which is behind this router. And in this router, there is a packet filtering, but no output filtering. And what the attacker is doing, the attacker uses for his data package an internal address. This 181.12.10.201. This is an internal address of this network, of this internal network 181.12.10.0. And the sender address is another system. He wants to attack inside the internal network. This is a to address. Although this package comes here from outside of the internet, it is when the router only checks these addresses, the router classifies this package coming from outside, as an internal package, because for the decision, whether it's an external or an internal package, the router checks merely the sender address. So this is the idea of the spoofing, to work with fake sender address and then to cause in this way router packet filter to do wrong decisions, and then the router allows to send the package here to the sender system and allows even critical things to do because it considers this as an internal package. So the spoofed packet has a falsified sender address, a falsified IP sender address, and typically the sender address is taken from the internal address space of a victim's network. Of course, the destination address, this is the IP address of the victim. So here you cannot falsify because otherwise the package goes to a wrong destination. So if routers merely check the spoofed IP addresses at the outgoing port by means of packet filter, if the decision the router takes whether he allows to transmit the package is only based on the fact whether it's an internal packet or an external packet, it makes wrong decision because, of course, it's an external packet, but it's considered, due to the faked sender address, as an internal package, and it's treated like, therefore, it's treated like an internal package. So if the falsified IP packets are relayed into an internal network, IP spoofing may become the starting point for a large number of other attack methods. So that's important. That makes this attack method, so important, because it's the first step for many other attack methods. Here are a few of them: so source routing, RIPE attacks, ICMP attacks, NNTP attacks, or TCP sequence number attacks. All these attacks, we will discuss later, all these attacks in the first step the attacker use, these attacks are started from the attacker with a spoofed IP address, with spoofing IP addresses. Next group of attacks on the internet protocol level are the ICMP protocols. ICMP, you remember, is the Internet Control Message Protocol. So this is an integral part of the TCP/IP protocol suite, and the idea and the task that is solved by this ICMP protocol is that it notifies the origin sender if the datagram, if there was some error in the network, so that the sender knows there is some defect routing station or others. So in practice, these routers and the hosts evaluate these ICMP messages automatically, and then based on this ICMP messages, some some configurations are automatically done. So there is a reconfiguration by means of this in many systems. There is a reconfiguration. Is possible based on the ICMP messages. So for that reason, if the attacker is able to cause sending some faked or some special ICMP messages, he can cause a system to automatically become reconfigured. Let's have a closer look on the basic idea of such ICMP attacks. The idea is the attacker sends an artificially created and manipulated ICMP packets. And he does this in order to cause certain reactions in the victim's computer systems, reactions like this reconfiguration we just discussed. The aim is, attacker wants to influence, or the attacker wants to allow certain operation modes of the networks, for example, source quench or fragmentation needed, or destination unreachable, or other reactions. And another aim of such ICMP attacks is that the transmission path is changed. And this can be caused by the attackers by means of such ICMP redirect messages. And when they are able to change the transmission paths, in many cases, this is a starting point of a break-in to a system. Let's have a look at the format of such ICMP messages. The ICMP messages are integral part of the currently used IP protocol version 4. And in the IP version 4 protocol, it cannot be deactivated. So the sender address of an ICMP message is the IP address of that node which discovers an error, which has discovered an error. So this is the sender address of an ICMP message, and the recipient, the destination address of such an ICMP message, that's the address of the origin sender of the relevant packet. So the original sender sends its packet through the internet, and there is a certain point, a router detects there is an error, then the router sends back an ICMP message to this original sender. So the sender address of this ICMP message is a node which has discovered the error, and the sender of this, the destination address of this ICMP message is the origin sender. The error messages are only sent to the original sender of the packet. So not to the intermediate systems, the intermediate stations. They do not learn that there's a problem. Only the sender, this is the concept, the original sender, is informed something went wrong with your package. Here is the format of such ICMP messages. We have, most important, a type field and a code field. There's a checksum, identifier a sequence number, and then the data. And for the type, each type of this message, there is a number of codes that explain the type in more detail. So when we look, then we see that the type field, there are the following codes used. For example, echo, reply, unassigned, destination, unreachable, source, quench, redirect. So you see here all this list of ICMP, of possible ICMP type field codes. And for the ICMP attacks, these types are mainly used. The destination, unreachable type, the source, quench, and the redirect. These are the mainly misused ICMP messages by the attacker. Let's have a short look. Each type is more detailed, explained by means of the so-called type code, by the code of the type. So when we have a look to the codes of type 3 messages, type 3 was this destination unreachable. We see network unreachable, host unreachable, protocol unreachable, port unreachable. So you see a list of possible codes that explain in more detail what is wrong in the case of the type 3 message that destination was unreachable. Let's come back to how attackers abuse such ICMP messages. And let's have a look what they are doing, for example, with messages of the type destination unreachable. If a data packet cannot be transferred to the desired destination address, the last intermediate system that detects the error sends the destination unreachable message back to the sender of the IP packet. The destination unreachable message transferred beside of this type and the code, also the beginning of the data packages that was not able to send through the network. So that the origin sender can see what package did not reach the destination. So the header and the first 64 data bytes are sent back in the destination unreachable message to the origin sender. Thus, the sender station can, at least in theory, realize which of the connection must be cancelled. And connection is based on ports. So typically, there are several ports that have to be cancelled. Now, what's the problem? Or what can be misused by the attackers? Some of the ICMP implementations are not able to analyze the port information of an ICMP message. And for security reasons, such implementation cancel all connections between concerned internet hosts. And of course, in this way, the attacker can parallelize a large number of internet connections with slight effort and within a short time. So it's a small attack, only based on some weaknesses of such ICMP implementation, that by means of such a destination unreachable message, the attacker can cause a denial of service attack, denial of service problems, because all internet connections are cut down. One can take some protection measures against such ICMP attack that are based on destination unreachable messages. As an integral part of the TCP/IP protocol, ICMP messages cannot be disabled, because this would be a way to protect against such ICMP messages, simply to forbid that ICMP messages are sent. But ICMP is an integral part and cannot be disabled. So there is no direct protection possible against such ICMP attacks. What should one do? So the routers of the system should be considered in such a way that only a limited number of such ICMP messages can be transferred within a certain time span into an internal network. So in this way, one can at least restrict the number of problems that are caused by such attacking ICMP messages. Another method to protect against such destination unreachable ICMP message attacks is that the network management system can control the number of ICMP messages. And the network management system can find out if there is a change that in a certain time span the number of ICMP messages is increasing largely. And then such system can raise alarm. When ICMP messages, the number of ICMP messages is increasing a lot without recognizable reason. And exactly this is a method that is used in intrusion detection system. We will discuss later in our lecture series. These are systems that are designed to find out whether a system is attacked, whether there is an intruder try to get access to a system. There are other ICMP messages that may be misused by attacker. Here, for example, is an example of an abuse of the ICMP message, the source quench type. Source quench messages, what was the idea? Source quench messages authorize gateway stations to reduce the transmission speed, the transmission rate, and the idea is to avoid overload situation. And the idea, the functionality is that as long as sender receives such a source quench message, it reduces the transmission rate. And now you can understand that attackers can attack a system, can perform a denial of service attack by sending such falsified source quench messages. In this way, they can influence the system that the transmission rate drops down, the system becomes more and more less powerful, the performance is going down simply by sending such falsified source quench method. So protection here is that the ICMP message type 4, this is exactly the source quench messages, they should not be allowed through a router or through a firewall. So they should be blocked. These messages should be blocked in a router or in a firewall to prevent this very simple method to influence the performance of a network by sending such type 4 ICMP message, such as source quench messages, to force the system to reduce transmission rate. Another protection method is that routers should block such source quench messages, since their use as a mean to control the control and influence the network, and to avoid such overload situation has deprecated meanwhile by other methods. Here is an example how another message, another ICMP message, the redirect message, can be misused. I mentioned the source quench, the destination unreachable, and the redirect message ICMP messages. That are the three ICMP messages that are mainly used to attack a system on the IP level. By means of the redirect messages, the router can help hosts which have recently been connected to the network, and to help them to get information, routing information, so that such new systems, newly introduced systems, are able to find optimal routes. So the idea is good, to help and to send information, routing information through the network. By such redirect messages, which are infiltrated by an attacker from outside, into the victims' networks. The way to do this, again, is by using IP address spoofing. An attacker can direct routers to change routing paths. And they can influence the router to change a routing path over a special station. Of course, it's clear. The attacker gives the information, forces the router to send all the traffic over his station, so that in this way the attacker gets a full insight in what's happening, what's communicated in the network, and he is able to perform a massive network break-in. Protection against such redirect attack, against this redirect attack, is that the router should be configured in a way that it ignores redirect messages and only transmitted packets according to their own routing tables. So that the router does not allow from outside that its routing tables are changed from outside. Here is such an redirect ICMP message type redirect. We have this type 5. We have 4 different codes. The codes that are possible for such type redirect messages is redirect datagrams for the net, redirect datagrams for the host, redirect the type of the service and net, and redirect datagrams for the type and service and host. And then, like in others, the internet gateway address, and then we have the starting of the package, the first 64 bits of an error-laced data package. I finish this overview about the ICMP attacks by mentioning the famous ping of death attack, which is an historical attack which nowadays does not work, but it became very famous, and you see this in this nice name. Many people were thinking about this. The ping of death attack. This is also based on an ICMP message. It's based on an ICMP echo request packet. And such ICMP echo request packets here, which is sent in the attack, they send a very long ICMP packet. You know there is a boundary of 65.535 bytes. That's a load. And what they do is they then send such an echo request packet which is longer than this boundary. And for that reason, when the router of the victim systems gets such a very long ICMP echo request packet, this echo request packet has to be fragmented to be transported inside the network. So it's fragmented, router fragments it, then the fragments are sent to the destination host, and there the destination defragment the pieces to get the original packet. And so the recipient system tries to process the packet, and then it crashes because the packet was too long, and it was not foreseen that such type of packets are proceed. So knowing this defect in the implementation, that system crashes down if there is too long IP packets, it is easy by means of such an ICMP message to force a system. It was easy by such overlong ICMP request packets to force a system to break down. Today, I mentioned already, current systems are immune to these attacks, so they do not crash down. If they get such an overlong package, they have some checking methods to recognize this and to prevent to crash down. So this was, here I mentioned a number of attacks which are based on misusing the ICMP protocol. Now I want to continue with the family, I continue to introduce the family of internet routing attacks. Remember, in the IP packet header, there was an option field. Option field, it was 8 bits long, and this option field provides additional functionalities. Additional functionalities like, for example, here is option number 0, end of option list, 1, no operation, 2, security and handling restrictions, and 3, the loose source routing, the internet timestamp, the record route, the stream identifier, and the strict source routing. So in this option field, some option can be set, for example 3 or 9, that in fact the route that is taken by the system. There, the option strict source routing and the option loose source routing allows the sender to determine, to influence the route that is taken through the network. In the case of strict source routing, exactly the sequence of transmission nodes in the correct order can be given that needs to be taken by the packet. So all the transmission nodes the sender wants to force the packet to visit are mentioned in this when this strict source routing option field says, then there is a sequence of this IP addresses, and of course these IP addresses need to address different intermediate systems which are directly interconnected. So with strict source routing, the exact path of the packet is described. The option loose source routing permits that only a few of intermediate stations are mentioned, the package need to visit. In the case of strict source routing, the exact intermediate way of the intermediate routers are given, and in the loose source routing, only some points can be given by the can be described by the sender that the package has to take when it's transmitted from sender to his destination. So here it's the format of such a strict source route option if the strict source root option is used in an IP data packet header. So here we have the code 9. So it tells this was the option field. This tells that is the strict source root. And now one by the other IP address is given of the intermediate stations. And when the package is transmitted and the router looks analyzes the data header of an IP package, he sees, okay, now this was my address, now I have to send the package to the second. And the second router knows he has to send it to the source. This is a format of this routing package. So now let's have a look how this mechanism can be misused by an attacker. The idea of the source routing attack is that the attacker simulates an IP address of an internal system. We know how this can be done. It's simply it can simply be done by IP address spoofing, and then he transfers data packets by activating loose source routing option to the attacker's remote host that usually does not lay on the root of the packet. So the attacker influence that all the packets use the loose source routing and gives its own address as an intermediate system. The package has to pass through. In this way, he can see, of course, all what's sent by the sender and can control the content and can falsify or do other things. What are protecting measures against this source routing attack? A protection measure is, first, a measure that makes IP spoofing impossible. So the gateways have to filter IP packets which have an internal address and arrive at an external port. This is one method. So in this way, it's impossible for the attacker to influence, to send this loose root package. Next protection measure is that the IP packets can be filtered that have an activated source routing option. So a system can trust in its own abilities and can, for example, forbid that such messages are sent with an activated option that has that influences, that try to influence the path the packet has to take. Another internet routing attack that belongs to the family of internet routing attacks is the RIPE attack. You remember RIPE is a routing information protocol, and the routing information protocol, this gives an information for defining and finding routes, optimal routes for the package. So the goal of such RIPE attacks is then an unnoticed redirect of data packets between two internal stations over the station of the attacker. And of course, the attacker tries to get inside, to get informed about all the communication activities of these two stations. So in this way, it is a man-in-the-middle attack. The man-in-the-middle attack, so that the attacker manipulates the routing, uses the routing information protocol to manipulate information about routing, so that all packets that are sent from A to B are sent via the attacker station. Here is the way how attacker performs this attack. The attacker forges a RIPE packet, and he forges this in a way that he claims that his host has the shortest path out of the network. And if this information is distributed by the right protocol and find its way into the routing tables, then all packages that are sent out of the network are sent over the station of the attacker. So all packets out of the networks are then routed through the route of the attacker. So the attacker can examine, can investigate the received packets. He can search for logins. He can search for passwords, or he can modify this package. So he is in the middle, the man in the middle, and sees all information, all packets that are sent from sender A to sender B, and can get informed or can even manipulate these packages. So the attacker can impersonate hosts by such man-in-the-middle attack. What are protective measures against these RIPE attacks? The protective measure is that the configuration of the internal routers should be done in such a way that, that modifications of the routing tables is not easy, and particularly not easy from outside. Besides of the RIPE protocol, also other routing protocols are available. Protocols that that use encryption methods to provide more secure methods. So, for example, RIPE version 2, specified in RFC 2453, is another routing protocol that cannot falsify it in the way because cryptographic methods are used. The final example of an internet routing attack I want to mention are the so-called EGP-based attacks. Also here you remember EGP is the exterior gateway protocol, and this was used to exchange routing information between two autonomous systems. Routing information between two autonomous systems. So EGP is used to connect mid-level networks to the internet backbone. So if someone is able to get information at this point, he can control a complete network. In Europe, the internet provider used the EGP implementation BGP4, the border gateway protocol for their communication. So the EGP-based attacks work as follows. The problem with these attacks is that they immediately can infect hundreds of networks. These mid-level networks, because they connect providers' networks to each other. So one attack method is this EGP spoofing. Here the attacker simulates an autonomous gateway and redirects the complete traffic between two internet providers over his own system. You see, immediately he controls all the traffic. He can control all the traffic between the two providers. Let's come to another family of attacks that are placed on the IP level. These are the ARP attacks. ARP, this was the address resolution protocol. And you remember the ARP protocol serves for allocation of IP addresses and hardware addresses, MAC addresses. So ARP resolution protocol helps to translate IP addresses in the corresponding MAC addresses, and one can immediately imagine how this can be misused by attackers. The functionality is as follows. An ARP packet is sent to all networks of a network. So it's a broadcast message. There is an IP, the router knows from the internet identifier that the destination of an IP package is inside this network. And now the router has to find out what exact computer, what exact host is it that has this IP address? So what router is doing, he broadcasts a message, who has this IP address. This is received by all the hosts of his network, and the right one answers back and says, this is the hardware address corresponding to the IP address you asked us. These ARP attacks are usually very successful, even when the connection are encrypted with SSL, SSH, or PPTP. The reason is the following, and this is the way such an ARP attack works. The ARP attack is based on the idea that many of such ARP broadcast messages are sent. A so-called ARP broadcast storm is sent. Another ARP attack is the ARP spoofing or ARP poisoning. Let's have a closer look on both of these attacks. Let's start with the ARP broadcast storms. The idea here is the attacker initiates the search of a non-existing internet address. And this will generate ARP packets that can lead to so-called broadcast storm. The broadcast storm provides an overload situation. An overload situation can cause a breakdown of the system or other bad effects. Particularly if there are loops in the network, or if switches don't have the spanning tree protocol implemented to detect such loops, or other mechanisms like storm control or broadcast suppression, this ARP packet will be broadcasted again and again. So asking who has this IP address that does not exist gives no answer, and there is, by means of the loop, a new question, and in this way there is an overload situation caused because more and more such broadcasted ARP packets are sent through the network. By the way, there was a famous worm, the worm Sasser, that caused such ARP broadcast storm in big local networks, since the infected host scanned for vulnerable machines on the network. The impact of such ARP broadcast storms is that they massively affect an operating mode of the victim's network by producing this many broadcast information ARP requests, which at the end consume a considerable part of the available transmission bandwidth over a longer time. So sometimes such extreme overload situations also cause undefined conditions for network components and improve in this way the prospect of success of several other attack methods. What are protective measures? Protective measures are investigate how an individual network reacts on such extreme overloading. So try out, produce in your own responsibility an overload situation and control what happens with the different components in such situation. Is there happening something wrong? So in this way, a media speed behavior is investigated. Another protective measure against such ARP broadcast storm is that switches need to be used with the spanning tree protocol, with features of storm control, with broadcast suppression, mainly features that prevent such looping situation. The second ARP attack I want to mention and introduce is ARP spoofing. ARP spoofing is that a spoofed ARP relay is sent to any host in the local network. So this is possible because these ARP messages are not authenticated. And of course, you immediately understand what's the problem. If such a spoofed and falsified ARP reply is sent to all the hosts in the local network, then the IP packages are sent to this. So here we have a LAN user, a LAN gateway, the internet, and there is a hub switch. And if the host will be updated, the ARP cache of the host is updated with a wrong ICMP MAC pair, with a wrong interconnection between an IP address and a MAC address, then all the traffic is sent to the wrong host by using this wrong assignment. So here we see that's the right way a package is sent to the LAN user. Here the switch finds out who has the MAC address and knows from that to which host it has been sent. If this is falsified, then the package is not sent to the right LAN user, it is sent to the malicious user, and the malicious user afterward, if he checked the package, he can transfer it to the original LAN user, so that the original LAN user does not become aware of this smart room. So the idea to give a wrong assignment between the IP address and the hardware address. This is the goal of this RP spoofing attack. So ARP spoofing allows, again, such a man-in-the-middle attack. So the attacker can intercept all the traffic between two stations, so he can see all because he influences the connection between the IP address. So the attacker tells Bob that that Alice IP address 10.0.0.7 belongs to the attacker's MAC address, CC, and so on, and vice versa. And then when Bob wants to send a message to Alice with the right IP address, due to the modified ARP cache, the package is sent to the attacker station with the corresponding MAC address, CCC. So the impact is to attack the cache, because you remember, if there is a resolution in the cache in the pair IP address, hardware address given, then no new ARP request is sent into the network. The hosts work with the tuples in their cache. So, and this is the idea to influence the cache by sending a spoofed ARP message, and then influencing the cache in the way that the IP address from Alice is not connected to her MAC address, it's connected to the MAC address of the attacker. What is the impact? Of course, this is an extremely dangerous attack, because the attacker in this way is able to completely control all the interaction. The big problem with this attack is that it's possible even on current systems. On current systems like MS Windows until Windows XP, it's possible for Linux system, it's possible for Unix system, it's possible for Mac OS X. So here all the traffic is silently redirected from the victim's system over the attacker station to the destination. So it's a very successful attack method, which is dangerous because it can be applied even to recent systems. What are protective measures? Protective measures is to forbid such influencing the ARP stack, the ARP cache, so work with static ARP caches and static ARP cache entries on all hosts on the network, so forbid that there is someone influencing the assignment between the IP address and the MAC address of on the network. And then intrusion detection systems, they can watch such ARP spoofing attacks and can prevent them. I come to another family of attacks, the IP fragmentation attacks. These are also attacks on the level, on the internet working level of the TCP/IP protocol stack. You remember the functionality of IP fragmentation allows to transport IP packets in networks which only support a limited maximal packet length. An example is that, for example, the maximal load capacity of an Ethernet packet is restricted by 1.492 bytes, while the maximal IP package length is 65,535 bytes. So it can be much larger an IP packet than the packets that are low to be transported over an Ethernet. So the idea in the TCP/IP protocol stack and the design in the IP protocol is to fragment this big package into small packages and then send the small packages separately over the network. So if necessary, if a router sees he has to transport the package over a network with a smaller maximal packet length, then then it starts to fragment the package. And the fragments are assembled back to the original data package into the original IP package only at the final destination. So the header of every fragment contains an identification number. You are familiar with IP technology, so you remember that the header in case of fragmentation several means, so that the receiver is able to reconstruct the original IP packet out from the fragments. In order to do this, the header of such a fragmentation contains an identification number, it contains the fragment flag, it contains the fragment offset, which helps to identify the location of the fragment in the large IP package. Now here comes the reason or the origin that such fragmentation can be misused to attack a network. And some reason is that the TCP port number, which is part of the header, the TCP header, this is typically only transported in the first fragment of fragmented packages. Because it belongs to the header, so it typically belongs to the first part, to the first fragment. So in many of the firewalls, they make decisions whether they block a package or whether they allow a package by analyzing the port number. So the reason is that the port number is only part in the first packages, in the first fragment. So in the other fragments, there are no information about the ports. So this makes possible to misuses for the denial of service attack like ping of death. We already discussed this. This was also the same idea. There was a very long package. This was fragmented, and when it comes back, it caused the system to crash down. But it's also possible to misuse this fragmentation mechanism also in another way for an attack. So, and this, many of these attack methods are based on the fact that the TCP port number is contained only in one fragment of the many fragments, typically in the first or second. So firewall systems, which are based only on packet filtering, often make a decision on such a TCP number, and they decide to block the package or not to block. And now if the package is fragmented and only one fragment contains the TCP number, such systems are able only to filter this fragment and not the complete package. So fragments of this dangerous package without the TCP port, they cannot be filtered because there is no TCP number, and so the system, the firewall system has no hint and does not know whether to block or not. It's even more problematic if we have a situation that the first fragment is so short that TCP port information is transported in the second fragment, then it's impossible to find out. This is completely impossible to find out that this is a dangerous is a fragment of a dangerous packet. There are other attacks possible. For example, the abuse of the TCP flag. Here, the packet filter controls the TCP flags beside the port number. For example, frequently arriving connections, SYN flag, are only permitted with certain addresses. With two overlapping fragments of a SYN packet, so-called negative of it, the IP packet passes the firewall system, since the SYN flag only arises when fragments are assembled on the destination system. Here is a problem with the fragmentation, and there are different fragmentations on different passes. The different packets, the different fragments of an IP package take through the internet. So we can have different situations of such irregular fragments that cause problems and may be initiated to cause such fragments. Whether they cause problems, this depends from the concrete implementation of the TCP IP stack. You know, for each operating system, we need such an implementation. For each device, type of device, we need different implementations. So there are problems, for example, typically when the fragments are assembled to get back the original IP packet. So with such teardrop, new tier, bonk, boink methods, one can cause such problems. Here are a short view on different irregular situations that can cause that can be caused by this fragmentation mechanisms. So, for example, we can have overlong fragments with longer than 64K. Then, in case of assembling the package, problems can occur. We can have the situation of overlapping fragments. This can be caused because the fragments are independently sent through the internet, and with a new router, they can fragment it in a new way. Please allow one remark aside. In the IPv6 protocol version, we have fragmentation. We do not have the situation because fragmentation needs to be done at the sender station. And the other dangerous situations, irregular situations that can occur when during the fragmentation process is here. That's interlocked. That's interlocking fragments. And of course, if you have filter mechanism based on evaluating the TCP port or evaluating TCP flag, then this causes problems. The most important protective measure here is a very careful implementation of the IP stack. So the implementations. This is a complicated mechanism with many situations, this fragmentation that can occur. So the implementation needs to be done in a way that such irregular situation may be discovered, and that certain methods are taken to prevent this. So better to control before assembly the fragments to get back the original IP package instead of highly prioritized processing speed. Because often such controls are considered to to limit the transmission speed. So one thinks, oh, it's not so dangerous, and to get high speed, the number of controls are reduced. But this is very careful and can be misused by attackers to attack system. So reasoned systems and reasoned stack implementation are immune to this mentioned fragmentation attacks, but to see where problems can occur and to understand what design decisions can have, what kind of consequences to security, it was important to discuss this. Also, this fragment attacks, to hold you informed about the various problems occurring which are make it possible to use, or better to misuse, IP protocol functionality for attacking. The last family of attacks I want to mention in this lecture is IP bombing. So here the idea is that the attacker causes a bombardment of victim systems with IP packages from many different computers and stations that are connected to the network. And this is a quite effective sabotage method because it consumes a lot of bandwidth, and so it infects the system, victim systems, that victim system does not work correctly, that people cannot communicate in time, that services cannot provide it in the real way. Usually, such type of the IP bombing attack needs some preparation, and itself is a preparation for other attacks. So here is this attack scenario for this distributed denial of service attacks for this IP bombing. The attacker installs small programs. The small programs are called agents on many computers over the internet. Of course, he can do this only with computers that are not correctly secured. So here the attacker finds and uses many computers in home networks which are easy to access and are not secured in the correct way, but also in computer pools of universities. Often they are not correctly installed and so can be misused, that the attacker is able to install such small agents in the computer. And the only thing what the agents are doing is to wait for a certain signal, a signal on certain TCP or UDP port, and the signal that's given by the attacker. And in the moment the agents get activated by the attacker, all agents in the same moment, exactly in the same time, they start a certain action. They send a message to the victim system, and this causes a big trouble. So for the systems, because the victim systems get all these packages in the same time. It is famous method. These are the so-called botnet method. So the agents, they perform, the agents together with the control by the attacker, they form the botnets, sometimes 10,000s of computers in the network that waiting, 100,000 computers that waiting on a command from the attacker to do immediately in the same situation, same action. So here we have the attacker, and attacker was able to place agents here all over the internet, and he is able to do this on computers that are not secured in the right way. And then he gives the signal, and all these computers send in the same time a package to the victim's system, victim's network, and in this way they can cause the victim to break down, or at least to influence the performance of his network. What is the most important protective measure? The important measure is to install filter programs on big internet gateways so that they can detect if there is immediately raising the number of a certain type of message, of IP message, to allow only a limited number to go through. Install search programs, antivirus softwares on each host in the internet, so that it becomes impossible for the attacker to install agents on the computers in the network. So everyone should run his computer in his responsibility with adequate security methods, because often computers that are not correctly used can become part of such botnets by the possibility of the agent to place an agent on them. So install search program, install antivirus software on each computer in the internet. So this finishes our first lecture about attacks on the TCP/IP protocol stack. In this lecture, we discussed attacks against protocols on the IP level, against the IP protocol. In the next lecture about this topic, we will discuss attacks against a TCP and UDP protocol, as well on the application protocol, to give you a full picture of what is possible for attacker, in which way attackers can misuse internet protocols, sometimes weaknesses of these internet protocols to successfully perform attacks. Thank you for your attention.